This happened over a decade ago somewhere in northern Michigan during the summer. My friend, Kathy, 18, my boyfriend's half-sister, May, 16, and I, 17, drove down from our hometown to visit friends. We were on our way back in Kathy's shitty little Geo. By shitty, I'm talking this piece of crap had engine problems, overheating problems, ignition problems, and was constantly falling apart. More than once, it had stalled or just stopped working in the middle of the street while we were trying to get somewhere. But Kathy thought we'd be fine, since we hadn't had any problems with it on the way to our friend's house. It's a little past midnight, and we're roughly an hour away from home. There's nobody on the road, dense woods on every side, no streetlights, no moon. I can barely see past the windshield because I have a form of albinism, which leaves me legally blind in my left eye and with really awful vision in my right. My depth perception is terrible, and I can't see more than a few feet ahead of me at most, but usually I can make out lights and other cars when they pass, and sometimes street signs and people when they are close enough. We drove down this narrow, hilly road, and on the descent down a hill, the Geo makes a strange sound. Kathy starts braking, and when we get to the bottom of the hill, the car quits working. Kathy swears and turns on the hazard lights. She and I get out of the vehicle, and I help pop the hood, which causes a bunch of smoke to fly out. After the smoke mostly clears, Kathy tries to figure out what went wrong this time. We stand in the dark for at least 45 minutes, maybe longer, before we realize she couldn't fix the car and needed a tow truck. These were the days of MapQuest printouts and brick phones, so we couldn't whip out our smartphones and look up the closest tow truck. I decided to call my boyfriend Caleb to come pick us up and suggest we come with a tow to pick up the Geo when it was daylight. May and Kathy agree, so I take out my cruddy Nokia and called my boyfriend. It's then I realize, no service. I ask May and Kathy if either of them have service. They both check and shake their heads. May gets a bit panicky, and we all hold our phones up, trying to get a signal to no avail. It's hot as fuck, and after failing to get any kind of service, we are all feeling a bit spooked and uncomfortable. May begs us to do something because she is more afraid than Kathy and I. Kathy attempts to calm May down, and I wonder if the thick woods and hills are blocking out our reception. I tell May and Kathy to wait by the car and walk away from them up the hill we had just come down, holding my phone out. Still no signal. I walk further and further away until I reach the top of the hill. I can't see the outline of the Geo anymore, but I can still hear May at a distance. Even at the top of the hill, I don't get a signal. I know it's gotta be the trees in the way, so I get the idea of climbing up a tree and calling from there, just to see if it works. In hindsight, this was not my brightest idea, but me being an idiot, I saunter off into the woods in search of a climbable tree. At this point, I just want to go home, and this is the only thing on my mind. I find a nice one with low branches and lift my body upwards towards the trunk. I climb the branches higher and higher, and about midway up the tree, I feel my pack of cigarettes fall out of my shorts pocket. I'm kind of annoyed, but figured I can just look for them when I climb back down. I take my phone out and hold it up once I get near the top. I have service. Relieved, I call Caleb, but he doesn't pick up, so I call again until he does. He answers in a sleepy but pissed voice, but I'm having none of that and simply explain our situation. He asks where we are, and I give the name of the road and my best guess as to how far along we are on it. He says he will be on his way and tells me to go back and wait with May and Kathy, then yells at me for being stupid and climbing a tree in the dark with my bad depth perception. I assure him that I'm fine, and he's skeptical but says okay, and we hang up. I start climbing down the tree, but my hand touches a big glob of sap, so I stop and try to wipe the sticky goop off on my shirt. I'm already sweaty and gross, so I'm not too happy about the sap. While I'm failing at getting this crud off my hands, I hear the strangest sound from somewhere below me. I completely freeze, not being able to place what the hell that sound is, but it's moving pretty fast. I stare down into the darkness below me, but can't see shit. Just hear this noise continuing. It comes closer and closer, and then I hear it right below my tree. Swish. And then it stops, right under my tree. I hold onto the branches as tight as I can and wait. I hear leaves shuffling and twigs snapping, and after a while that stops and the weird noise starts again, but it's heading away from me deeper into the woods. I wait until I can no longer hear the sound, then finish climbing down and jump out of the tree. It's completely silent now, besides the sound of the woods, so I grope around on the ground for my cigarettes. I don't find them, so I make my way out of the woods and back towards the road. I jog down the hill, and when I reach the bottom, I notice May and Kathy are not standing outside the car anymore, and the hazard lights are off. I walk over to the car, and May rolls down the window a little bit and whispers in a panicked voice, "Elizabeth, where the hell were you?" I point back over my shoulder towards the hill and start to explain that I called her brother, but Kathy yelled, "What are you doing? Get the fuck back in the car!" I give them a weird look, but May unlocks and opens the door, and I crawl into the back seat with her, slamming it behind me. Kathy slams the lock and double checks them while May rolls up the window and makes sure the rests are rolled up. One of the windows has never closed all the way, but there's less than a finger space, so it's not too big of a deal, but May is freaking out about it, and Kathy has lost her cool as well. I'm still confused and ask what the heck is going on. May tells me that a bit after I went up the hill, some weird person came out of the woods and ran really funny up the hill in the direction I went. They got freaked out and turned the lights off and got in the car. They thought he had got me. I am honestly scared at this point, because if I hadn't stopped to wipe sap off my hands, I most likely would have got out of the tree at the time I heard the weird noise. I just knew it was that person. I tell them my story, and everybody in the car is scared shitless, but we are relieved that Caleb is on his way. We only have to play the waiting game now. We sit on the road for what seems like forever. The dread we were feeling made time seem like it was going slower than normal. Kathy and May are looking out the windows, surveying the area, and I'm just sitting there hoping Caleb will hurry the fuck up and come rescue us. Suddenly, I hear May whine, "Oh my God," and she starts crying. Kathy snaps her head to where May is looking and stifles a gasp. I look where they are facing. I see nothing but dark. But then I hear it through the small opening in the window. Swish, swish. May ducks down, as though doing that will make her invisible, and Kathy hides her head behind the steering wheel. I follow their lead and sort of hunched down in my seat, but the noise comes straight up to the window. I can almost make out the silhouette of a tall, skinny man, and then he presses his face against May's window, and I finally see him. Nobody screams. You'd think we would, but it didn't happen. We all just stared at each other. He looks in at us for a while, until Kathy switches her brights on, hoping it would scare him off, but it did nothing. The dude just walked to the front of the car and stood in front of the headlights. Maybe he thought he would be blocking us from leaving. I don't know. I couldn't make out his features very well, but the guy had to have been somewhere a bit over 6 feet and no older than 30. He had the face of an average Joe, nothing special, nothing really sinister or particularly creepy that you'd notice about him if you ran into this dude in broad daylight. Dark shaved hair, pale skin, long face. May said he had light-colored eyes and stubbled with eyebrows that made him look like he was always concerned, but there was no way I could make that out, so I had to take her word for it. What was really weird was it was like 80 degrees, and this dude was wearing corduroys, which is what that sound was. Corduroys making that swishy noise when you walk, and an oversized sweater with abnormally long sleeves. The sleeves went over his hands and flopped back and forth as he paced around in front of the Geo. I'm not sure how long he was in front of the car, but it was a while. Then good old Corduroy starts doing something really bizarre. He bends his arms up towards his face, which I can only describe as looking like a praying mantis because of the way his sleeves were hanging, and then he begins walking circles around the car, rhythmically taking 2 steps forward, 1 step back like goddamn Willy Wonka, but on speed or something. This is where I noticed the swish sound matched up exactly to the same sound I heard when I was back in the tree. He was doing this 2 steps forward, 1 step back in the fucking woods when he was going after me, as though this wasn't weird enough. By now, May was sobbing, and Kathy seemed like she had to vomit, so I felt like I had to be the brave one. I looked at the slight space in the open window, and when he orbited his way over there, I said, "Hey man, can you just stop? You're really freaking us out." Corduroy definitely heard me, so he swished to a halt and looked back into the car through the windshield, straight at me. I asked him very firmly to leave, and he took an extended pause, smiled, and then Willy Wonka'd his way out of my line of vision into the darkness. After a while, Kathy said he disappeared into the woods, and May was like, "I can't believe that worked." We awkwardly laughed about what a weirdo he was, and glad he left and whatever, and we went back to waiting for Caleb, somewhat reassured, but still paranoid. But after some time, Kathy said, "Oh no, he's back." I couldn't see, but apparently he was doing the 2 steps forward, 1 step back parallel to us on the side of the road, and this time he had a big tree branch he was holding with his sweater-covered hands. May got scared again, and I held her hand so she'd feel better about it, even though I was ready to shit myself. It was awful, because I didn't know if he was coming towards us or if he was moving our way or what the hell he was up to. It was kind of like when you knew there was going to be a jump scare in a horror movie. Then I hear Corduroy swish back towards the Geo and on my window. He smacks it with the tree branch. May and I panic, and I scoot as close to her as possible. They see the dude back up into the woods, then come running back and slamming the branch back into my window, like he's jousting with no horse. Thankfully, The window didn't break, but it got terrifying hearing swish, swish, clunk after a while, and he did this repeatedly. Kathy perks up in her seat and starts pointing at the road ahead. "I see headlights!" She blares the horn and flashes the lights. Lo and behold, it's our savior, Caleb. He brought his older brother Alex, and they both get out of his car and head over to us. May's sobs turn into joyous laughter as her brothers approach. Now, Caleb and Alex have always been tall guys. Walking around with them was like walking around with high elves. It felt very safe. Caleb was 6'8", and Alex is around 6'5", so I thought two dudes taller than Corduroy Jouster would make him leave. But nope. Caleb walks towards Corduroy, trying to assess the situation, and Alex comes over to the car and taps on the window, tells Kathy to get out. She does, and he walks over to his car, then comes back and puts the car in neutral so he can push it off the side of the road. May and I slowly get out, and May makes a bolt for her brother's car. I help Alex push the car to the side while Caleb distracts the Corduroy Jouster by holding the end of his stick and telling him to fuck the fuck off. Corduroy yanks the branch away from Caleb and starts backing up by going 2 steps backward, 1 step forward, and then disappears into the darkness down the street. I can't see him, but Caleb can. The dude backs up pretty far, and then comes launching at Caleb, who sprints the other way down the road, 'cause that stick could have really hurt him. He bumps past Alex, who had already got out of the Geo and was opening his car door, leaving me behind in the Geo alone. Corduroy apparently changed directions and aimed the stick at me, but I really couldn't tell. I just hear everybody shout, "Elizabeth!" This startles me, and I jump to the side of the Geo, hearing Corduroy smash his stick into the back window with a loud thud and a swish. I take the long way around the car and sprint off into the road and feel Caleb grab my arm and tug me over to Alex's car. I feel like the wind has been knocked out of me and my legs don't seem to work, but Caleb manages to shove me in the back seat and scrambles into the passenger side. By now we are all safely in the car, and Corduroy is standing like a mantis in front of the headlights. He'd abandoned his stick and just stood there with no intention to move. Alex puts the car into reverse and slams on the gas, making me knock my head against the door, then makes the sloppiest U-turn ever and nearly drives us into the woods, but gets us back onto the road. Everybody was in 100% what the fuck mode as Alex tore away, far over whatever the speed limit was. May and Kathy swear they saw Corduroy chasing behind us after Alex made the U-turn, but there was no way he was catching up. The next day, I went back there with Caleb, Kathy, and the dude from the tow truck. There was no sign of Corduroy anywhere, but when we approached the Geo, we saw that in the space where the window didn't close all the way were my cigarettes. The box was missing, but they were all neatly jammed in a row along the window space. I have no doubt it was the work of the Corduroy Jouster. To this day, I wonder if he knew I was up in the tree and took my cigarettes, or if he thought I dropped them and went further into the woods to look for me, or if he just found them later and decided to stick them through the window because he was fucking weird. I also still wonder what the hell his intentions were. I still have so many unanswered questions.
It was the summer before my senior year in college. My little brother, always interested in military stuff, had gotten a pair of night vision goggles for his birthday, and he'd left them at my apartment. One night, I was bored and decided to go try out the goggles at a wooded hiking area / nature preserve nearby. In retrospect, this seems like a very stupid idea since I was all by myself and female. But I was young and stupid, and I got myself all excited about the possibility of seeing deer and other woodland creatures in their natural nighttime habitat. I was familiar with these woods. My best friend and I hiked there at night before, and we'd never run into anyone else. Our area is mostly rural and pretty safe, so I didn't anticipate any trouble. I parked in the little, sparsely lit parking area, ignored the sign saying park closes at 10, and entered the woods, night vision goggles in hand. It was a half moon that night, and that was the only light that filtered down through the canopy of trees. It was pretty dark, and I didn't want to put on the goggles until I'd found a place to sit down, so I lit my way with the mini mag light on my keychain. A couple of times I thought I heard a little rustling in the woods a fair distance away, but it was nothing out of the ordinary, and I put it down to animal activity. Hopefully, the deer I'd come hoping to see. After I'd hiked in a fair distance, I found a fallen log to sit on and put on the goggles. I don't know if you've ever used night vision goggles before, but the effect is impressive. They can turn near-pitch darkness into something bright as day. Everything appears in various shades of green, but quite bright and clear. For a while, I had a blast looking around from my fallen log vantage point. Some chipmunks played around in the leaves nearby, and a big owl blinked its lamp-like eyes at me from a tree branch. No deer, though. And I started to think that maybe they wouldn't be likely to come anywhere near me, darkness or no, if I sat right out in the open on a log. So I decided to find a place where I could be a little more hidden. I made my way a little deeper into the woods and finally found a huge tree, perfect for climbing. I've always loved climbing trees, so it was nothing for me to hoist myself up a few branches and settle in to wait for my deer. I didn't get to see any. What I did see, lit up in bright night vision green after about 10 minutes of waiting, was this. A man, dressed head to toe in dark-colored clothing, making his way stealthily through the woods. He was coming from the same direction I'd come from, and was clearly trying to stay hidden, moving from tree to tree and glancing around carefully before moving on again. It looked very much like he was looking for someone. It took me a few moments to notice that he was carrying something, and when I saw what it was, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. He had a knife, a big one, and he was gripping it as if he expected to use it in the very near future. It wasn't deer hunting season, and this was a nature preserve where hunting of any kind was prohibited anyway. And at any rate, the guy was alone and not dressed like a hunter. There were no deer in sight, and very few hunters kill their prey with knives. I suddenly became horribly aware of my situation. A young woman, alone, weaponless, in the middle of the woods at night. This was the 1990s, so no cell phones, and even if I'd had one, I wouldn't have felt safe using it lest I draw his attention. I didn't know how he was able to see so well in the dark. My guess was that his eyes must have adjusted, and I was terrified he would look up and see me. I sat there, afraid to move, afraid to breathe, and watched him as he continued his methodical and stealthy process of scanning the forest for who or whatever the hell he was stalking. I scanned around but couldn't see anyone else, even from my high vantage point, and the sickening thought struck me that he might be looking for me. I remembered the rustling noises I'd heard in the woods when I first arrived, and then I thought back further and remembered something else. A white car that had followed too close behind me for most of my drive to the nature preserve. I'd been annoyed and a little freaked out at the time, but when I turned into the nature preserve parking area, the white car had passed me and driven on its way, and I hadn't thought anything more of it. Now I wondered, horrified, if this was the driver of that car. If he'd circled back and seen my parked car, alone in the lot. If he'd come in after me. I sat, paralyzed with fear, and watched the man for what felt like forever but was probably another half hour or so. There was a heart-stopping moment when he paused right underneath my tree, and I was sure he was going to look up and find me. But he didn't. After a while, he seemed to give up on whatever plan he had in mind. I heard him say, "Fuck it," and he started heading back in the direction he'd come, the direction of the parking area. I stayed in the tree, wet from sweat and crying until the sun came up a few hours later. Then I climbed down and, still terrified, gripping the little can of pepper spray on my keychain, I made my way as fast as I could to the parking lot. The man had been there. My windshield had been smashed with a rock, and someone had scraped all down the sides of my car with something sharp. Presumably, a giant knife that I'm lucky didn't end up in my chest. Thank God for the night vision goggles that let me see him before he could see me. And thank God for big trees with sturdy branches.
This story goes back a few years ago when I was a 17-year-old high school student. Every day I'd walk the 25 or 30-minute journey to and from school. There was a shortcut I could take home that took some time off the walk, and as a nature lover, the shortcut was very enjoyable. Here's a diagram, since the setting of the story is not very easy to describe. Sorry for the shitty 3D representation. Whenever I'd walk home alone, I would take this shortcut to enjoy the small amount of forest we have in the medium-sized, moderately busy city I lived in. My shortcut was pretty well traveled, and I would occasionally see other people walking from their neighborhood towards the busy streets close by, or other students walking home from a high school or the college. Sometimes there would be no one but me on the path. To give you an idea, the path definitely was not groomed, but it was traveled enough that you could make out a path from being trampled over the years. The shortcut started off from the busy road by my high school and went into a low-lying open wooded area with some small ponds. After a few minutes of this, I could veer right up the big hill towards the street parallel to my street. One day, I was walking home from school after staying a bit late for extra help. A few minutes into my shortcut, I noticed a guy standing off the main path a bit, seemingly minding his own business and talking on a cell phone. There was an open backpack sitting on the ground by his feet. Growing up with overprotective parents and in martial arts, I have always been a very cautious person and take in a lot of details, especially being a young girl out walking alone. This wasn't unusual by any means, since the entire low-lying area is traveled and there are numerous paths off the main path leading different directions, since it isn't a thick forest. sort of like a free-for-all for walking. Sometimes people would stand off the busy road while waiting for the bus stop close by, not wanting to stand in all the traffic fumes while people sped by during rush hour. The only thing I took caution of was that I had been seeing him there a few times that week and had never seen him before. But all well, maybe he was a college student or just moved into the area. This time walking on the shortcut felt different though, possibly because there was no one else on the path today. But I started to get this bad feeling in my stomach, the one everyone has a hard time describing, but most people know too well. Something was not right. I was already well along my shortcut though, and I decided to blame my feelings on me being paranoid, which is not uncommon of me. I kept an eye on him out of my peripheral vision walking by, and he continued to talk on his cell phone and didn't seem suspicious, so I continued on my merry way. I must have walked 20 or 25 meters away when the guy stopped talking on the phone, and I felt an even bigger feeling of dread in my gut. I turned around to see him crouched over, phone gone, fidgeting around with some sort of cloth in a brown glass bottle. Before I had a second to register what the fuck he was doing, his head shoots up my direction, and the look in his eyes is a terrifying mix between I've been caught and I'm not stopping now. He drops everything, leaving his shit behind, and starts sprinting straight for me, cloth in hand. At this point, I'm too far away from the busy road for anyone to see me in the low-lying woodland with this crazy fuck, and I'm too far away to scream bloody murder. My first instinct in that split-second decision is to run towards my neighborhood. I decided this all as I turned around, throwing my heavy backpack to the ground and sprinting as far as I could, starting up the hill towards my neighborhood. Judging by appearance, this guy looked like he could break me in two with no effort, and I trusted my flight response more than my fight response. Plus, I didn't know what the fuck he had in his hand. All throughout school, I had been the top cross-country and track runner in my entire school, out of the female and male teens. My running had been my savior on a few other let's-not-meet worthy occasions, but soon into this chase, I knew it wouldn't be enough this time. This guy was fucking fast as shit, and I could tell he was slowly gaining on me without even looking back. I finally see some fenced-in backyards up ahead and hope people are home from work. I start trying to scream help as much as I could with my out-of-breath and useless voice. I make a split-second decision to start jumping fences up people's yards, hoping this guy's hurdling skills are shittier than his running. The first fence throws him off, but by the second one into the next yard, he is on my ass and I feel him come insanely close to grabbing my leg. I am shitting myself at this point. I see no cars and driveways, no sign of anyone home, and the only thing that is keeping me from panicking and wiping out in my exhausted state is thinking that I may not ever see my family or friends again. The next yard belongs to people I know rather well, including their dog. Necessary background interruption. This house was close to my street on the street parallel to mine, and I have come to know their dog rather well since they recently moved in. My friend hated the shortcut, and sometimes I would walk to school with her on the street down the hill to the busy street. This dog was huge and an absolute maniac, and usually, when kids were walking to school, they would put him in the backyard instead of their front yard, since he would growl and scare the shit out of kids walking by while he was tied outside. I love animals, so every time we'd walk by, I'd talk calmly to him through his menacing, "I'll fuck you up" barks. Every time he'd be slightly less vicious to me, until one day the nice people who lived there gave me a treat to give to him, and after that, the dog was a nice stop on the way to school. The dog's name is Leo. With that next yard, My newly acquired friend in sight, I had never felt hope like I did in that moment. By some insane stroke of luck, they let him out of their backyard for the afternoon while they were at work. When Leo saw me frantically running toward him, he started wagging his tail, then looked to the guy chasing close behind me, and he started growling. I thought this would be enough to get the guy to fuck off, but no. He started to jump over the fence the second after I did, but the dog jumped up, and his teeth came so close to his face that the creep fell backwards into the yard straight on his ass as I fell into the dog's yard on my ass. The creep and I stared at each other out of breath for a few seconds, while the dog was barking and jumping like mad at the fence at him. Maybe he was assessing if he could take on Leo or not. I prayed the creep didn't have a knife or something. The guy looked angrier than I had ever seen a person, and after a few seconds got up and started running back down the hill from where we came. I sat there for a few seconds in complete shock and couldn't move, until my hero started licking my face. I snapped out of it and ran to the back door and started pounding. They obviously weren't home, or else they probably would have heard what just went down. My house was close, so I jumped the fence and ran the rest of the way home and called the cops to investigate and try to find the guy. I gave them the best description I could after coming practically face to face with him. The dude's bag was gone, and so was every trace of him. They found my poor backpack in a muddy puddle, and the police told me they'd keep looking. Never saw the guy again, and I didn't hear anything more about it, and after calling the office a few times, I gave up. They told me during that time they had received sketchy reports, people being stalked, chased, etc., but nothing like mine. Over the last few months there were a few missing person cases, but in a city like the one I'm from, not the worst, but not the best, you can never connect anything like that for sure. The more I thought about it over the years, the more fucked up it is and the more confused I am. First, if he was trying to kidnap me, why didn't he think of a better way to grab and snatch me into the forest before I had the chance to get away, or before another trail goer possibly walked by? He didn't appear to have a weapon on him or anything except that creepy cloth. And what the hell did he have in his hand? A friend thought it may have been chloroform, but I did research on it, and apparently it's more a myth that pouring it onto a rag and covering a person's face causes them to faint very quickly. Plus, where the hell would you get it anyway? Thanks to that asshole, I never walk the shortcut anymore without at least 2 friends and pepper spray or some sort of protection. So, sex trade kidnapper, amateur stalker, serial killer, or whatever the fuck you are, let's never meet again. Leo got lots of extra lovings whenever I saw him.
This was going to be short, but the memory sprung into my mind a couple days back, and I thought it would be worth sharing. I live in North Wales, United Kingdom. For anyone who's had the pleasure of visiting, it truly is a beautiful place to live, though for an adolescent boy, it's certainly lacking in things to do. As a result, my friends and I would often find ourselves mindlessly exploring areas of countryside and coastline. Despite it being quite sparsely populated in comparison to the closest cities, there's a dual carriageway running along the coast from Wales to England. Also, train tracks run alongside this road for most of its course, occasionally passing overhead via a small cement bridge. Anyway, there was one night a few years ago when about 4 of us randomly decided to try and explore inside one of these bridges, as one of the group had observed a manhole cover nearby, which we believed to be the entrance. On closer inspection, we discovered that several tools would be required in order to gain entry. We returned with the necessary equipment and proceeded to unbolt the cover. This had to be done stealthily, as the train track was right beside us, not close enough to be of any danger, but definitely a sufficiently small distance to cause panic for any train driver. And panic usually means police. It wasn't long before we had removed the heavy steel disc and had started descending the ladder down into the structure. Once we had all safely reached the bottom, we decided to progress to the other side. At this point, we are totally confined into the narrow space that leads into the main area. If you're confused as to what the hell this bridge is supposed to be, you probably should be, because it was rather peculiar. I mean, I would have never known there was even an inside at all had we not found the manhole. So, as we squeeze and crouch and at one point scrape along our bellies to the other side of the structure, there's a growing sense of claustrophobia between us. The distance from one end to the other is surprisingly long, but by the halfway point you can look down through narrow gaps onto the motorway below. This was actually pretty cool, which helped keep us calm in a strange way. At this point, apart from the mild discomfort and confinement, we were still just a group of guys on an adventure. This was about to change dramatically. No more than a few meters beyond halfway, which we could tell due to the symmetry of the passageways through the bridge, one of us claimed they could see some object in the distance at the far end. Slightly hesitantly, we agreed to investigate. Bad move. I reached the end first, and let me tell you, I have never felt the same sense of dread before or since. In front of me was a single fold-away chair positioned facing a wall. On the wall was a partially torn page from a newspaper or a magazine showing a fully naked lady in an erotic position. The reason I don't just refer to it as porn is because something was different about it. I can't put my finger on it, but it seemed more sinister than sexy, if that makes any sense. More disturbingly, the eyes of the woman on display had been cut from the page, removed with precision, not just hastily ripped off. The scene that lay before us had rendered us completely speechless, and an overpowering sense of panic could be felt collectively. That was when we found the condom. The horrendous, gut-wrenching, blood-drenched condom. Needless to say, we got the fuck out of there as fast as humanly possible, smashing our knees and shins against the sharp cement edges that lined the path to the ladder by which we had entered. Of course, we were all praying to God that the manhole hadn't been resealed, as it was impossible to tell until you reached the ladder itself. Thankfully, the exit route was clear, and we promptly dashed as far away as our legs could carry us. I'm sure this ending comes as a disappointment to some of you reading this, as we, luckily, never bumped into the twisted individual who sits in that chair. But I must stress how radically out of the norm this was given where I live. The reason I mentioned the population earlier was with purpose. There is easily enough people here to escape the realms of crazy country folk, yet nowhere near enough people to have someone clearly lose grip on society without someone taking notice. For example, there was literally only one homeless man who everyone in the area knew and grew fond of, eventually resulting in a mass gathering at his funeral when he passed away. I sometimes think, though not recently as I had more or less forgotten about that night entirely, about the person who climbs down into that bridge and navigates through the darkness to sit facing a wall and do God knows what, that ends up with a condom full of blood. You honestly couldn't envision a more surreal situation.
I climb the branches higher and higher, and about midway up the tree, I feel my pack of cigarettes fall out of my shorts pocket. I'm kind of annoyed, but figured I can just look for them when I climb back down. I take my phone out and hold it up once I get near the top. I have service. Relieved, I call Caleb, but he doesn't pick up, so I call again until he does. He answers in a sleepy but pissed voice, but I'm having none of that and simply explain our situation. He asks where we are, and I give the name of the road and my best guess as to how far along we are on it. He says he will be on his way and tells me to go back and wait with May and Kathy, then yells at me for being stupid and climbing a tree in the dark with my bad depth perception. I assure him that I'm fine, and he's skeptical but says okay, and we hang up. I can barely see past the windshield because I have a form of albinism which leaves me legally blind in my left eye and with really awful vision in my right. My depth perception is terrible, and I can't see more than a few feet ahead of me at most, but usually I can make out lights and other cars when they pass, and sometimes street signs and people when they are close enough. We drove down this narrow, hilly road, and on the descent down a hill, the Geo makes a strange sound. Kathy starts braking, and when we get to the bottom of the hill, the car quits working. Kathy swears and turns on the hazard lights. She and I get out of the vehicle, and I help pop the hood, which causes a bunch of smoke to fly out. After the smoke mostly clears, Kathy tries to figure out what went wrong this time. We stand in the dark for at least 45 minutes, maybe longer, before we realize she couldn't fix the car and needed a tow truck. These were the days of MapQuest printouts and brick phones, so we couldn't whip out our smartphones and look up the closest tow truck. I decided to call my boyfriend Caleb to come pick us up and suggest we come with a tow to pick up the Geo when it was daylight. May and Kathy agree, so I take out my cruddy Nokia and called my boyfriend. It's then I realize, no service. I ask May and Kathy if either of them have service. They both check and shake their heads. May gets a bit panicky, and we all hold our phones up, trying to get a signal to no avail. It's hot as fuck, and after failing to get any kind of service, we are all feeling a bit spooked and uncomfortable. May begs us to do something because she is more afraid than Kathy and I. Kathy. This happened over a decade ago somewhere in northern Michigan during the summer. My friend, Kathy, 18, my boyfriend's half-sister May, 16, and I, 17, drove down from our hometown to visit friends. We were on our way back in Kathy's shitty little Geo. By shitty, I'm talking this piece of crap had engine problems, overheating problems, ignition problems, and was constantly falling apart. More than once, it had stalled or just stopped working in the middle of the street while we were trying to get somewhere. But Kathy thought we'd be fine, since we hadn't had any problems with it on the way to our friend's house. It's a little past midnight, and we're roughly an hour away from home. There's nobody on the road, dense woods on every side, no streetlights, no moon. He attempts to calm May down, and I wonder if the thick woods and hills are blocking out our reception. I tell May and Kathy to wait by the car and walk away from them up the hill we had just come down, holding my phone out. Still no signal. I walk further and further away until I reach the top of the hill. I can't see the outline of the geo anymore, but I can still hear May at a distance. Even at the top of the hill, I don't get a signal. I know it's gotta be the trees in the way, so I get the idea of climbing up a tree and calling from there, just to see if it works. In hindsight, this was not my brightest idea, but me being an idiot, I saunter off into the woods in search of a climbable tree. At this point, I just want to go home, and this is the only thing on my mind. I find a nice one with low branches and lift my body upwards towards the trunk.